Staff Sergeant Del Rankin took the long crate off the supply truck, read the name stenciled on the side, and set it down in the runoff ditch where the diesel and the melting snow had turned the ground into a slick brown soup. He did it slowly, the way a man does a thing he once witnessed. Then he straightened up, wiped his hands on his trousers, though they weren't dirty, and turned to the 6 Marines loitering by the motor pool. "Careful with that one," he said. "Word his regiment sent us a specialist." He let the words sit in the cold air a second. "A real trigger puller. Came all this way." The men grinned because they were supposed to grin. The woman standing at the tailgate did not say anything. She stepped down into the mud, walked to the ditch, lifted the crate out of the water, and checked the latches with 2 fingers to make sure the seal had held. Then she picked it up and carried it toward the command hut without looking at any of them. And that quiet, the complete unbothered, almost bored quiet of a person who had already decided you were not worth a single word, was the first thing that should have told Del Rankin he had just made an enemy he could not afford. Before this goes any further, if a story about someone the world underestimated means something to you, do this channel a favor and subscribe, follow it all the way to the end, and leave a comment telling us the town you're watching from tonight. It matters more than you'd think, and I like to see how far these travel. Her name was Sergeant Adela Locke, and the first thing she registered about the outpost was not the cold, though the cold was there, and it was serious. It was the arrangement of the men. She had been doing this job for 11 years, and in that time she had learned that you could read almost everything about a place in the first 2 minutes if you stopped trying to be liked long enough to actually look. So she looked, 6 Marines by the vehicles, doing the theater of maintenance, none of them actually turning a wrench. A radio man leaning in the doorway of the comm shack with a coffee, watching the road instead of his gear. A corpsman she couldn't yet name, older than the rest, sitting on an ammo can cleaning his glasses, who had glanced at her once and then gone back to his glasses in a way that told her he'd seen 100 new arrivals and had stopped placing bets on any of them. And Rankin, in the center of it, broad and unhurried, 36 or so, with the specific confidence of a man who had been the biggest presence at every small outpost he'd ever been posted to and had never once had that confidence tested by someone who didn't care about it. The outpost itself was a rough handful of hardened shelters and sandbag walls jammed into a shelf of mountain above a river gorge, in a country whose name changed depending on which valley you were standing in and whose winters did not negotiate. Ridges rose on 3 sides, gray-white and enormous, their tops smoking with blown snow. On the 4th side, the ground fell away toward a road that switched back down to a village, and, past that, to the pass everyone up here simply called the Neck, because it was the narrow throat that every convoy and every patrol and every problem had to pass through to get anywhere. The wind came off the high snow in long, even pulls, and it carried a smell of wood smoke and cold rock and, faintly, the fuel from the ditch where her rifle had just been sitting. Rankin fell in behind her about halfway to the command hut, not to help, and she knew it wasn't to help, because a man who wants to help walks beside you, and a man who wants an audience walks behind you, where he can perform to the yard. "Locke," he said, reading the tape on her chest like it was the punchline to a joke he'd started earlier. "That short for something?" She kept walking. "They told us we were getting a sniper," he went on. "Didn't mention we were getting a..." And he did that thing, the little open-handed gesture that took in all of her, boots to face, and meant everything he didn't have the nerve to say out loud. Behind them, the yard laughed on cue. Locke had been in worse rooms than this one. She had learned a long time ago that silence in a moment like this was not surrender. Silence was collection. When you let a man like Rankin keep talking, you learn the shape of him, where the fear was, where the resentment lived, the exact dimensions of the hole in him that he was trying to fill with somebody else's small humiliation. Rankin, she could already tell, had a hole in him you could drive a truck through. "I'm looking for Captain Halloran," she said, at the door of the hut. "Which one is it?" Rankin pointed, took his time about it. "That's him, but you'll want to get squared away first. Long way to haul all that." Another nod at the crate in her hands, which she was carrying without any apparent effort at all, which annoyed him more than if she'd been struggling. "I've got it," she said, and went in. Captain Sean Halloran was bent over a plywood table with a laminated map on it, marking something with a grease pencil, and he was the kind of tired that isn't about a bad night's sleep, but about a career of them. He was maybe 42, dark hair going to iron at the edges, and when she came in he stood, not fast, not for show, just the plain reflex of a man raised to get up when someone new entered a room. He shook her hand. He had a good grip and a careful face, and he looked at her for a second longer than was strictly polite. Not the way Rankin had looked at her, but the way a man looks at a tool he's been told is very good and is trying to decide whether to believe it. "Sergeant Locke," he said, "you come recommended highly. I've read your file twice." He tapped the map. "I'll be honest with you, because I don't have the time or the temperament to be anything else. I asked for a designated marksman. I did not ask for you specifically. Regiment sent you specifically. That tells me somebody upstairs wanted you at this exact outpost, at this exact time, and nobody has told me why. You wouldn't happen to know, would you?" She held his eyes. "I requested this posting, sir." "That's not what I asked." "No, sir, it isn't." He looked at her for another beat, and then he did something she respected. He let it go. He was too smart to press a thing he wasn't ready to hear the answer to, and too experienced to think that a soldier who kept her own counsel was necessarily hiding a problem. Sometimes it was just a private grief, folded up small and carried where it wouldn't get in the way of the work. He'd carried a few of those himself. The nickname made it around the outpost by that evening. By the time she was unpacking her gear in the plywood cubicle they'd cleared for her, she'd heard it twice through the thin walls. They were calling her the recruiting poster. As in they finally sent us the recruiting poster, boys. Somebody warned the enemy. It was Rankin's line, of course. It had his fingerprints on it, the particular cruelty of a man who reduced you to an image, a thing designed to be looked at. Precisely because the idea of you being good at something he was mediocre at was more than he could hold in his head at once. She heard it, and she filed it away with everything else, and she went on cleaning her rifle by the light of a headlamp, because the rifle did not care what anyone called her, and neither, when it came right down to it, did she. What none of them knew. Not Rankin, not the corpsman whose name turned out to be Ames, not the young radioman named Ruiz, who kept sneaking looks across the chow line like she was a rumor come to life, was that she had not come 3 deployments and half a world to be a marksman at a border outpost above a frozen river. She had come because of a name on a folder that she had been carrying, unofficially and off the books, and against the strong advice of the 2 people she still trusted, for the better part of 4 years. The name was Locke, same as hers. Sergeant First Class Micah Locke, her older brother, United States Army, 75th Ranger Regiment, killed at 29 in an operation 2 valleys east of where she was now standing, in a place the after-action report described as a chance enemy engagement during a routine movement. Her brother had been the most careful man she had ever known. He did not walk into chance enemy engagements. He had spent his whole life reading a room before he entered it, the way she now read every yard she stepped into, because he had taught her how. And somewhere in the 4 years since a folded flag had been handed to her mother on a lawn in Ohio, Adela Locke had come to be very sure of one thing. Whatever had happened to her brother in that valley, it had not been chance. She had spent those 4 years pulling one loose thread, a frequency, a single line in a signals intercept that a friend of a friend, a warrant officer named Petrov who owed Micah his life, and knew it, had slid across a table to her in a bar outside Bragg with his hands shaking. A radio transmission? Logged the night her brother died, on a band that shouldn't have been active, carrying a set of coordinates that matched her brother's route to the meter. Somebody had known exactly where Micah was going to be. Somebody had told the men who were waiting for him. And the frequency had gone quiet after that night. For 3 years. Then 4 months ago, it had come back on the air. Here, in this sector, running through this valley, which was why when the request for a designated marksman came down the pipe with this outpost grid on it, Sergeant Adela Locke had done everything short of begging to make sure her name was on it. The first patrol she went out on, 3 days later, taught her more than any file could. Halloran sent a squad down to the village and up toward the neck to check a stretch of road where a supply truck had been hit the month before, and he sent Locke along to sit up high and watch. Rankin was leading the squad on the ground, and he made a show of not needing her, which was fine, because she made a show of nothing at all. She set up on a spur of rock above the road, with Ruiz spotting for her. The kid had volunteered, to Rankin's visible disgust, and she watched the patrol move, and she watched the village, and she watched the ridge lines, and what she noticed was this. The men in the village were not surprised to see the patrol. Not the ordinary lack of surprise of people used to soldiers passing through. A specific lack of surprise. Doors that were already closed before the squad came around the bend. A Gothard who moved his animals off the road a full 2 minutes before he could possibly have heard the vehicles. Somebody in that valley had known the patrol was coming, and had known the route, and had had time to pass the word. She said nothing about it that day. She had learned again from Micah that the fastest way to lose an insight was to announce it before you'd earned it. But that night she went to the comm shack instead of the chow line, and she found Ruiz there, and she asked him casually about the radio traffic in the valley. And the kid, who was lonely and 19 and grateful to be spoken to like a professional, showed her the log. And there, buried in the ordinary chatter, was the frequency. Her frequency, the one from the bar outside Bragg, active in this sector. 3, sometimes 4 times a week, always in the hour before a patrol went out. She stood in the doorway of that shack, with the cold coming off the mountain at her back, and she felt something she had not let herself feel in 4 years, which was the sensation of a door she had been pushing against her whole adult life, finally starting to give. The thing about a leak is that everyone assumes it points outward. Halloran assumed it. Rankin assumed it loudly at every opportunity. Some village elder, some interpreter, some kid taking money to make a phone call when the trucks rolled. That was the comfortable story because it kept the rot on the other side of the wire. But Locke had spent a long time now thinking about frequencies and timing, and who had access to a route before it was walked, and the more she watched the log over the next 2 weeks, the more the comfortable story stopped making sense. The transmissions weren't coming from the village. She spent 4 nights triangulating with a directional antenna Ruiz built her out of scavenged parts, both of them lying to the duty roster about where they were. And every night the bearing pointed the same way, not down the valley toward the houses, up the shelf, toward the wire, toward the outpost, toward them. Somebody inside the perimeter was putting patrol routes on the air before the patrols walked them. And whoever it was doing it on the same frequency that had killed her brother 2 valleys east 4 years ago, on a night that a piece of paper still called chance. She did not sleep much after that. Not from fear, she had gotten past ordinary fear a long time ago, but from the specific, cold, disciplined effort of not doing anything yet. Because she understood better than anyone at that outpost that if she moved too soon, if she went to Halloran with a theory and a scavenged antenna and a private 4-year obsession, the frequency would go quiet again, the way it had gone quiet before. And she would spend the rest of her life 2 valleys east of the truth. So she waited. She ran her patrols. She let Rankin call her the recruiting poster. She let the men keep their distance, all except Ruiz, and slowly old Ames the corpsman, who had watched her long enough now to have quietly changed his bet, and she watched the wire. The morning it all came apart started like every other one. Halloran got a request to escort a medical resupply down to the village clinic and then push a patrol up toward the neck, because intelligence, the same intelligence that had never once been early enough to help anybody, suggested the enemy might be trying to interdict the pass before the weather closed it for the season. He put the squad together the night before, Rankin leading, 8 men, plus the resupply, and Locke, watching from the comms doorway, saw Ruiz's log light up an hour later with the frequency. A short burst. Coordinates. Times. She copied them down. They matched the patrol route Halloran had just briefed, and this time she did not wait, because this time waiting meant 8 men walking into a valley that already knew they were coming. She went to Halloran in the dark, before the patrol formed up, and she laid it out. Not the 4 years, not her brother, not any of it, just the operationally relevant part. There is a leak. It is inside the wire. It is broadcasting on a specific frequency in the hour before every patrol. It broadcast 40 minutes ago, and the men you are about to send down that road are already compromised. Halloran was quiet for a long moment. He was not a stupid man, and he was not a proud one, and he could hear that what she was telling him fit every unexplained thing that had bled his outpost for 4 months. But he also could not simply cancel a resupply to a clinic on the word of a marksman and a scavenged antenna, not without more, not without knowing who. Then let me be where I can help, she said. Put the patrol out, change nothing they can see, but put me up high, off the roster, where nobody knows I'm watching. If somebody down there is waiting for those men, they've set up on the ground above the road, because that's the only place it works. And if they're up there, I'll find some before they fire. And you'll have your who, because I'll be looking right at them. Halloran looked at her for a long time. Then he said, go. She was in position before first light, a full ridge higher than anyone expected a shooter to be, in a hide she'd cut 2 nights earlier during one of her illegal antenna runs because some part of her had known this morning was coming. Ames had insisted on coming up with her to spot, the old corpsman wheezing and swearing at the altitude, and she'd let him because Ruiz was needed at the radio and because a man who changes his bet has earned the right to be there when it pays. The cold up there was the kind that got into the fillings of your teeth. She lay in it and did not move, and let her breathing go long and slow and quiet, and she watched the road come out of the dark below her, like a gray thread laid across white cloth, and she waited for the sun. The patrol formed up at the outpost behind her. She heard the engines, thin and far, Rankin's voice on the net, easy and bored. The trucks rolled down the switchbacks, and on the ridge across the valley, at the exact place where the road bent through a narrow cut just before the village, the one place where a convoy had to slow and could not turn around. The sun came up over the far peaks and put its first flat light on the hillside, and Adela Locke saw them. Not one. Five. 5 men, dug into the rocks above the cut, spread along 150 meters of hillside, weapons out, waiting. She had suspected as much, and it was still a thing to see them, the calm, professional patience of an ambush that knows its prey is coming because someone told it so. She keyed her radio, low. Halloran, Locke, I have 5. On the north hillside above the cut, they are dug in, and they are set. The patrol is 11 minutes out. A pause on the net. Then Halloran's voice tight, and can you stop it? And she did the arithmetic that 11 years and a father who had sat her on a porch and a brother who had taught her the wind had built into her without her having to think about it. The range, which was long, longer than anything anyone would call reasonable. The wind, which was quartering off the high snow and would push a bullet nearly a body's width at that distance. The light, which was rising and would soon put a glare on her scope. The spacing of the 5, which meant she would have to move between them fast, before the first shot told the rest that the mountain had eyes. And she said, yes. What happened next took just under 9 seconds, and there were 9 men on that road who would spend the rest of their lives not knowing how close it had come. She started with the man on the far right, because he was the one with the clearest angle down onto the road and would do the most damage first, and because starting on the right meant her rifle would track left across the others in the same direction the shots would draw their eyes, buying her a fraction of a second on each. She let out her breath, took up the slack, waited for the pause between 2 beats of her own heart, and pressed. The range was so long that she saw him fall before she heard the report come back off the far ridge. She was already moving, second man, center right, in the moment, before he understood that his partner had not simply lain down. Third, the wind gusted and she read it in the snow smoke off the peak and held for it, and the 4th man dropped where he crouched. The 5th had a full second to understand what was happening. A full second to see 4 of his friends gone and know that death was coming from a place he could not find, and he was rising to run when she took him. 5 shots, 9 seconds. Ames beside her had stopped breathing entirely, his spotting scope frozen on the hillside, and when it was over, he let the breath out in a long, shaking cloud and said, very quietly, the only thing there was to say, which was nothing at all. On the road, the patrol had heard the shots come rolling across the valley and gone to ground and gone loud on the net. And Rankin was screaming about contact. Contact? Where's it coming from? And it took Halloran 3 full transmissions to make him understand that the contact was 5 dead men on a hillside who had been about to kill him, and that the reason he was still alive was lying on a ridge a mile away in the cold. The patrol came home without a scratch, every man of it. And by that afternoon, the whole outpost knew, in the way that outposts know things, that the recruiting poster had just saved a squad from a slaughter with a piece of shooting that none of them would have believed if they hadn't walked back up the switchbacks on their own 2 legs to tell it. Rankin did not thank her. She hadn't expected him to. What she was watching for was something else, and she got it that evening when she came into the comm shack to help Ruiz pull the day's log. Because she wanted the transmission from that morning, the one that had put the ambush on the air, and she wanted the exact time on it. And Rankin was there, in the shack, where a squad leader had no reason to be, standing over the log with a look on his face that she had seen before, 4 years ago, in a mirror, the night Petrov slid a frequency across a bar table. The look of a man who has just realized that a thing he thought was buried has come back up out of the ground. She did not confront him. She had learned that too. She simply said, "Long day, Staff Sergeant," and let him leave. And then she and Ruiz pulled the log, and there it was, The burst transmission from that morning, the coordinates, the times, sent its 0510, 40 minutes before the patrol rolled. And Ruiz, who had spent 2 weeks now building antennas and keeping secrets and becoming, without quite noticing it, a very good young intelligence Marine, said, "Sergeant, the set that sent this, it's keyed to a personal frequency. There's an operator code embedded in the handshake." He looked up at her. "It's a friendly code. Somebody signs this transmission with a Marine's login." They took it to Halloran that night, all of it this time. The frequency, the timing. The operator code, which belonged, when they ran it, to Staff Sergeant Del Rankin. And then, because Halloran, once he believed a thing, moved fast and did not stop. The wider picture that came apart over the following 72 hours as a signals team from regiment and then 2 men in civilian clothes, who did not give their names, arrived on a helicopter and started pulling threads. Rankin had been selling patrol routes for money, which was the small and stupid and human center of it. But the frequency he sold them on was not his. It belonged to a network, a relay, a handler, a system for moving American movements to people who paid for them, that had been operating in these valleys for years, longer than 4 years, long enough to reach 2 valleys east, on a night the paperwork still called chance, when a careful ranger named Adela Locke had walked a route that somebody had known, on a frequency that somebody had sold, into a place where men were waiting for him because they'd been told exactly where he'd be. They told her on the 4th day. One of the men without names in Halloran's hut, with Halloran standing by the wall with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life, because it was the expression of a man who has just understood why a marksman requested a specific posting at a specific outpost, and never once said why. The network Rankin had fed, the man told her, matched a signature they'd been trying to close on for years. The same relay, the same handler, connected, when they pulled the full history, to a list of compromised operations across 3 countries, including one 4 years ago, 2 valleys east, involving a ranger element from the 75th. He said her brother's name out loud. He said it the way you say a name you have decided the person in front of you has earned the right to hear. And Adela Locke, who had not cried in 4 years, who had turned every ounce of that grief into the cold discipline that had let her put 5 men down in 9 seconds, at a range no one thought possible, sat very still and let herself have exactly what she needed and no more. She has been asked since how long she let herself have it. She always says the same thing. About a minute. She gave herself about a minute in that plywood hut on the roof of the world, to be the sister and not the sniper, to feel the grief and the fury and the terrible aching love she'd been carrying, folded up small for 4 years, and then she folded it back up because it was not finished yet. And she had learned from the best man she ever knew that you do not let the wanting of a thing keep you from the doing of it. Rankin did not go to trial. There was nothing to try. Faced with the operator code and the log and the money they found, and the 2 dead-eyed men who did not give their names, he pled to everything they put in front of him. 8 charges. And then, when he understood what his cooperation was worth against what his silence would cost, he gave them the handler. The handler gave them the relay. The relay came down 4 months later in a joint operation across 2 borders that Locke read about in a report she was not supposed to see and read anyway, standing up 3 times through. 14 people indicted. And the cases, this was the part she read a 4th time and a 5th. The cases of 11 American service members killed across 9 years in operations the network had sold, including Sergeant First Class Adela Locke, United States Army, were formally reopened, pulled out of the file, marked routine and chance and enemy contact, and reclassified for what they had actually been, which was betrayal, with full honors restored to every name. They wanted to give her a commendation. Halloran told her about it himself, the 2 of them standing on the eastern berm of the outpost on a cold gray morning while the sun came up hard and white over the ridge and put its indifferent light on the snow. He said the board had read his statement, and his statement had been comprehensive, and they wanted to recognize what she'd done on that ridge and what she'd brought back from it. She stood there with her hands in her jacket and the wind coming off the high snow, and she said, "The 5 men on the hillside, sir. That was the job. That's what I was sent here to do, and I did it." She turned and looked at him. "The rest of it, my brother, the frequency 4 years, that was mine. That was never the core. I don't want a medal for the part that was just for me." Halloran was quiet a moment. Then he asked her what she did want, and she looked back out at the mountains, at the road switchbacking down toward the village and the neck beyond it, and she said, "The other names, The other 10 families, I got mine. I want them to get theirs. I want the cases to hold and the network to stay down, and every one of those families to get the morning I got." She paused. "If you want to do something for me, sir, make the cases hold." Halloran looked at the mountains with her for a while. "They'll hold," he said. She believed him. She took a formal reprimand for the unauthorized antenna and the illegal triangulation runs and the 4 nights she'd lied to the duty roster, and in the same week she was promoted by a board that had read the whole story and understood, the way institutions occasionally understand, that the reprimand and the promotion were not a contradiction but a description of a person who would break a rule to save 8 men and then stand there and take the consequence without flinching. She requested a transfer to a training billet. They gave it to her. And so the last place this story leaves her is not on a ridge above a frozen river, but on a flat, cold, unglamorous range back, stateside, standing behind 12 young Marines. Men and women both, and she made a point of the both, teaching them the thing that is almost impossible to teach, which is not how to shoot, because anyone can be taught how to shoot, but how to be still, how to wait, how to read a wind you cannot see in a room you have just walked into, and the exact size of the hole in a man who needs to make himself bigger by making you smaller. She told them what her father had told her on a porch in Ohio when she was young, and sure she already knew everything, and what her brother had shown her every day of his life without ever once making a speech about it, that the ground you fight on does not care what you are, or what anyone said about you, or whether the people standing next to you believed a word of it. It cares about one thing. It cares whether in the single moment when everything comes down to it, you did the quiet, unwatched work beforehand to be ready. She told them that being ready is never something that arrives on the day. It is the sum of every freezing morning and every clean your rifle again night, and every time you chose the harder discipline when no one was there to see you choose it. And then she told them to pick up their rifles, because the light was good and the wind was coming up off the range. And neither of those things had ever, in the whole history of the world, waited for anyone to feel ready first.